Okay, good evening. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight in this panel discussion on energy efficiency. My name's Steve Cohen. I'm Executive Director of the Earth Institute here at Columbia and a professor at the School of International and Public Affairs. And so welcome to Managing Energy Efficiency, Translating Policy from Action to the Real World. So we're going to talk about the real world, guys. We know that one of the greatest challenges facing the world is providing clean, affordable, and reliable energy. The proliferation of energy efficiency products and practices has helped to reduce energy consumption per capita in this country, but global energy consumption continues to increase dramatically. Now, here in the United States, utilities are challenged with meeting our energy needs in a sustainable and environmentally responsible way. But each year, much of the energy produced is lost through inefficient processes and technologies, increasing the cost of energy to residents and businesses throughout the country. Energy efficiency has become one of the most critical issues of any sustainability plan or energy policy. It's really the low-hanging fruit of sustainability management. What's the argument against energy efficiency? Should we waste energy, spend more money? A little hard to argue against this subject. Still, while businesses and households benefit from energy efficiency and the lower costs from energy efficiency, it's not always easy to get people to change their behavior and institutions to change their behavior. There are sometimes financial and other reasons why energy efficiency is not brought about. So tonight, our panel will share some innovative policies and programs and new methods and ideas for financing energy efficiency here. We have experts from New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, people who can help us think this through. Now, before we begin our panel discussion, I'd like to introduce David Sandalow, who is the Senior Research Scholar at the School of International and Public Affairs and the inaugural Fellow at the Center on Global Energy Policy, to welcome you on behalf of the Center. Please join me in saying hello to David.
Thanks, Steve. I'm delighted to be here to welcome you on behalf of the Center on Global Energy Policy. It's great to be co-hosting this with the Earth Institute. At the Center on Global Energy Policy, we've had a tremendous series of programs over the course of the past year. Since the center was established, we've had high-profile speakers, including Energy Secretary Ernie Moniz, including General Stanley McChrystal, and many more. Our upcoming events include an event on Arctic energy resources on March 26th, one on nuclear energy in Japan on April 2nd, one on Russia and Europe and gas, a timely topic, on April 7th, and one on solar power and net metering on April 10th. And we're also doing a range of research on topics including energy exports from the United States, shale gas in China, energy poverty in Africa, and much more under the leadership of our director, Jason Bordoff. If you're not on our mailing list and you want to be, come find me after this, and you can check us out at www.energypolicy.columbia.edu, www.energypolicy.edu. And so it's a special pleasure to co-host this event because of the importance of the topic, which Steve has just so articulately discussed. It's also a special pleasure because of this panel. I know all of these panelists by reputation, and it's a tremendous panel. It's my really great privilege to know one of them, Chairman Richard Kaufman, from close personal work together at the U.S. Department of Energy. I can tell you from the work we did that the White House and U.S. Energy Secretary Stephen Chu depended heavily on Richard's counsel, valued it greatly, and the state of New York is very lucky to have you, Richard, working for them. There's no finer public servant. So with that, back to Steve.
Thank you, Dave. So we are very fortunate to have this panel of experts, and I want to introduce them to you. Now, you all should have on your chairs biographies in detail, so I'm going to spare you that, but just tell you who's here. First is Elizabeth Ackerman, Director for Economic Development and Energy Policy for the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. Seated next to her is Ron Arauja, Manager, Conservation and Load Management for Northeast Utility Services Company. Frank Evans, who is the Regional Vice President Northeast for Willdan Energy Solutions, a company that works on energy efficiency. And as you just heard, Richard Kaufman, who's the chairman of NYSERDA, is board of directors and chairman of Energy and Finance for the state of New York. So I'm going to move over here and sit down with the panel and start with some questions, if you guys don't mind. So the first question is, what are some of the most innovative methods to encourage people and organizations to undertake energy efficiency projects, and what success stories do you want to share with us? So we'll start with you, Elizabeth.
I think the programs that are most innovative in affecting the adoption of energy efficiency must start with behavior change. Behavior change is the cheapest way to save energy. And I think that starts primarily with education and outreach. I think it's important that we educate both the ratepayer and the end user about energy usage. The Great Recession has turned out to be one of the greatest energy conservation programs in recent times, and energy usage has dropped significantly over the past 4 to 5 years. And the question is, how do we encourage that awareness and the simple act of turning down a thermostat when someone leaves the building, or turning off a light when you leave a room? And I believe that a lot of that needs to be conveyed through education and outreach, not only for the short-term values of energy efficiency, but for the long-term values or the long-term benefits to ratepayers as well, because we can avoid infrastructure costs. And I do believe that energy efficiency has the opportunity to transform what is today a very aging and congested grid. And I also believe that in addition to the ratepayer and the benefits to the ratepayer of energy efficiency, it's important to educate and inform occupants of a building. That starts with the way that we design buildings to optimize natural light and ventilation and provide comfort and healthy environments. Many of the smart technologies that are available today increase this awareness. Things like smart meters, smart thermostats, energy dashboards. And I do believe that as we increase the energy efficiency of housing stock, not only housing stock, but all buildings, the market will step in and start to take over that process for us.
Ron, some innovative ideas to save energy.
Okay, there's a couple of areas I think that I'd like to touch on. One is on the engagement side is how do we get customers or communities to get engaged, and that's where you want to generate the excitement. One of the things that we've done at Northeast Utilities is that we've actually gone out and reached out to communities to try to get communities essentially get their neighbors engaged and enrolled in energy efficiency, and to give them goals to strive for. And the way we do that is by actually trying to provide a reward to that community, a monetary reward, if they hit certain milestones along the way. And that reward gets to be applied towards energy efficiency or renewable efforts. So we try to get the communities engaged, and we go after it where they're talking to their fellow neighbors to get the homes enrolled either in energy efficiency programs or to make changes to reduce their consumption. And this also transverses into the towns themselves, so that way the towns themselves are benchmarking their schools and their municipal buildings and trying to understand where they're using energy and then taking actions to reduce it. And all these things add up to a point system where almost like a Weight Watchers for towns on energy usage to try to figure out how can they go about and reduce their usage in the community. The other area that I think is important is the engagement of channels to make sure that energy efficiency is brought through various channels. And we've done this by engaging vendors and distributors and working together with them to actually impact or influence customers to make decisions that not only do the tried and true simple things that everyone sees like lighting, but to go in and truly attack some of the deeper measures within the customer's business. An example of this is actually something we had done with a restaurant chain, McDonald's. We had actually worked with one of the contractors who had mentioned that was talking to a franchise owner, and the franchise owner was interested in looking at his lighting and trying to update his lighting. What we did is we sat down with that particular contractor and we looked at the store itself and identified the additional opportunities above and beyond lighting that they could do. We looked at refrigeration controls, we looked at the rooftop air conditioning and heating systems, and we looked at exterior and signage lighting. And what I asked them to do is work with your distributors and don't look at this as if you were pricing it for one store. Look at it as if you were pricing this for multiple stores. He went through, got the pricing. We were able to propose that to the franchise owner, and he did the first store to try it out. He liked it so much, he did the remaining 7 stores and then invited us in to reach out to the franchise association, and we've gone through and done that. And we've actually repeated that success in another area with another coffee chain where we've done the same thing, and that actually, we took it from Connecticut and spread that out and even to Massachusetts. So I think there's some very good, innovative ways that you can go about trying to engage customers to go above and beyond what most people typically see, which are lighting programs.
Frank, some creative and innovative ideas to save energy?
Well, first off, thank you, Steve, for inviting us. And thank you to Columbia for hosting us at a wonderful facility. From my perspective, which is a little different in terms of we're a commercial entity, and we're a firm going out and seeking to work with lots of companies and direct customers throughout the nation. But we also work, and it's something that I think we a lot of times take for granted, particularly in places like the Northeast, that there are wonderful programs that we're able to bring to our customers. So, for example, ACEEE, ranks the states every single year. Massachusetts is 1, New York is number 3, California, where Willdan was originally based, was number 2. We did a lot of work in data centers there, and NYSERDA was actually responsible for bringing us into New York and saying, you've done a lot of good work in California, can you come here and do it? And we were able to do that. We were able to grow our offices, and we've done 45,000 projects.
One of the things I was going to say, the data farms are an interesting example. We use a lot of computers here at Columbia, and the penalty for the guy running the computer operation is if the boss's smartphone goes out, their email goes out in the middle of the night, they lose their jobs. So they want generators on top of generators on top of generators to make sure that no matter what happens, the servers don't lose electricity. Are there any ways that you guys in your company or around have figured out how to work with these data managers to be a little bit less redundant in their use of energy?
Yes, and in fact, I think one of a project I'd highlight is actually one that we sent through New Jersey, and through their large energy users program, where we work with Equinox, and which is a large data center facility. We went on in, we changed drives, we upgraded the way their HVAC systems worked, and we were able to save almost 2 million kilowatt hours, and it was for $900,000. And we did receive some rebates from the state, and so the payback on it was very quick, and so that was a very satisfied customer, and we've worked with them in other places around the country.
Sounds good. Richard, how about the state of New York, which got off slowly, but now is really becoming one of the leaders on energy efficiency?
Well, you talked, Steve, about energy efficiency being low-hanging fruit, and a lot of people have talked about that. And there's no question that there's been progress made thanks to the recession. but we've got just a tremendously long ways to go. And if we look at CO2 emissions, we're sort of 2x what other developed countries are in Europe. So we have just an enormous amount of work to be done. And you can look in New York City, where many progressive people and recognize this kind of market failure. And I'm not talking about the market failure because there's no cost to carbon, but we're coming into the summer and every store and cafe is open with the doors open and the air conditioning is just blowing out. And so for those of us that are aware, it's unbelievably painful to imagine that we're doing this, and it's a market failure. And so we can spend time talking about it, but it seems clear that that some of the reasons for the market failure are that we don't pay very much for energy in the United States, and dollars and cents, which is the way that energy efficiency has been marketed, isn't seen to be very effective for most customers. And the environment isn't necessarily a meaningful motivator for many customers. So this is and what's really interesting about what's come up already in this panel is that this idea of customer engagement in communities is really, really, really new. And so this is not something so the questions about innovation and what you're hearing here is really at the beginnings of something really important in terms of what can be a sea change in adoption and energy efficiency, because it starts sort of like the towel in the hotel room, you know, the sign that says, you know, hang up the towel, save the planet. That's not the effective sign. The effective sign is 75% of the people that stayed in this hotel room hung up the towel. So the tribe is a more important motivator than saving the planet. And so when you talk about the stuff you're doing with communities, that's very exciting to us in the state, because that's how we want to try to change our state policies. So we have a residential energy efficiency program run out of NYSERDA. 70% of the houses in New York State are more than 70 years old, and so the state will pay up to $300 for somebody to come into your house and do an audit to see what you need to do, and the state will pay up to 20% of the cost of the actual, and a grant to do the retrofit. What a great program. At the current rate of penetration, it will take 1,000 years to retrofit the housing stock in New York State.
Dollars?
And so the only good thing, that's right, the only good news is that fortunately it's not very effective, because otherwise it would bankrupt us. So we need to evolve away from programs we have today into things that are going to animate markets, as opposed to the state, in a sense, being the market. And if you think about the state as being very good at this kind of stuff, and particularly calling it an audit, oh, this is great marketing. We're going to have the state come in and do an audit of your house.
We'll call it an energy massage.
Can we be surprised? So I just want to pause and really underline what you've heard so far, because this idea of orienting communities and how states can work with private sector entities to animate markets is really strikes me as being really on the right track.
You know, it's interesting, because I think that's absolutely right, that certainly getting people aware of these issues is important. But I also think that there's a mismatch of financial incentives. The building I live in, we don't control the heat. The steam comes up. You open up the windows. You know, there's that part. You go to something like the New York City Housing Authority. They don't have electric meters or electric bills in their homes. So you have this sort of, and then in general, if a building owner wants to put in energy efficiency measures, but most of the space in the building is controlled by lessees, how do we connect the people who are putting in the money with the people who save the money? And can we create, and again, this would require government to play a role.
Well, so can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just one thing I wanted to point out, because this is a mystery that is going to be solved for many of you. Why is it that buildings are so warm and you have to open the windows. It seems incredible to imagine why this would be the case.
I think heat rises.
The other answer is public health, because in New York City, people were worried about tuberculosis. So the buildings were designed to be overheated precisely so that you would open the windows to bring in air, fresh air. Okay? So that mystery. Okay, so the government policy. I think there are a couple things the government can do, and again, in the realm of it being less about a regulatory solution and more about a market-based solution. So one thing is that part of what makes energy efficiency difficult is that there are service providers that would like to come in and put in capital and have somebody pay for it over, have a customer pay for it over time. But too often, what happens is that an energy efficiency solution requires a customer to commit capital to something that's an operating expense. And that's a little bit of an unnatural act, because you consume energy on an operating basis. This is true as a commercial or industrial customer or residential customer. You pay your bill every month. And that's how you like to consume energy. And so if somebody comes to you and says, well, I've got a great deal, but you have to buy this thing, and it's going to, you're going to get really good payback, you're really not that interested in responding. And so if you look at the solar residential lease, it's transformed the solar market because it's taking an energy solution and paying for it as you go, as opposed to having to buy your solar system. That kind of financing mechanism is the exception rather than the rule. And so in energy efficiency, it's very difficult to have service providers offer that kind of solution. So one of the things that we're doing in terms of policy in New York State is we have a green bank that is working in collaboration with private sector financial institutions that can help create those kind of financial products. And the reason those financial products are difficult to offer to customers is because there are constraints in bank lending, and these are new products. And so just a little help in terms of providing a kind of financial guarantee can make those kinds of products possible.
Okay,
I'd like to jump in here, though, and I agree with you, but in my mind, the greatest challenge to developing that energy efficiency market is the way we collect and report data. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of private capital sort of circling the perimeter, ready and eager to jump in, but it's very difficult to assess risk associated with investments in energy efficiency. And part of that is because the industry is in its infancy, and we're all trying to solve problems in our own neighborhoods as, befits our region or our utility or their client base. What's really important for the success of an energy efficiency market is that we all measure and we adopt the same standards, we adopt the same protocols, and that we get widespread adoption. Because markets don't recognize state boundaries or utility boundaries. Markets are beyond that. So as much as we need to make sure we're adopting the right policies, as an industry, we also need to sort of impose a degree of discipline on ourselves and start to say, what are the protocols that we're all going to agree to, so we're all measuring energy and savings the same.
So we're going to need federal regulation. Anyway, Ron, why don't you tell us what you think are creative solutions on finance?
Okay, well, I want to build off a little bit of what Richard was talking about. I mean, just to kind of give a little backdrop, I mean, we've been doing energy efficiency for a number of years, before I was even there. But one of the key things is that he had mentioned the word audit. And one of the things that we've learned a long time ago is that audits, what they tend to do is generate a lot of paper report that someone looks at and does nothing with. And you don't end up with anything out there. And so what we've done is that we've evolved over time. The first thing we did is back in the mid-2000s, I think it was around 2006, we actually got together with the gas utilities and we decided we're going to administer the gas incentive programs or energy efficiency programs and do it all under one umbrella. And then what we did is we designed a home program, a home outreach program, which didn't go out and do just an audit. We changed the name just to get around that. We called it an assessment. We thought we were very clever. But what we did is we actually trained vendors, certify them through the Building Performance Institute to make sure that they could deliver had a certain level of knowledge with regard to building science. And we dispatched them into homes to not only assess the building for opportunities, but do the direct install of measures at that time. Because we recognize that some customers were going to take action based upon the audit, if we just did an audit, but some customers would never do anything. And so all we did was we paid for an audit. So what we did is we kind of swapped that model on its head and said, let's go out and assess the homes and deliver essentially direct installed measures at that particular time. And that was some of the simple things that could be done during the time of an assessment, like lighting and water saving measures. But it also assesses the status of the insulation, the heating and cooling equipment and windows. And we also added air sealing to the mix, where we actually made sure they went out with a blower door and sealed up the home, because that's something that customers weren't even thinking of. Everyone heard about windows, that I should do that, or I need to tune up my furnace, but no one was looking at air sealing. They just knew that they were cold and drafty. So what we've done is we've evolved, and now we're doing that at the time of the visit, so we're actually getting savings at the time of assessing and identifying the future opportunities, so that way we can go after those opportunities systematically afterwards. Because now what we've done is we've taken the information we've gained on that customer, we're marrying it to usage and how other customers are participating, and essentially segmenting those and trying to figure out, okay, what messages work with that certain group of customers. Because the message to a certain segment might be a young family that's within a home. The message to them might be, let me make the home more comfortable for you and better for your child, and go after that. And that's the appealing message. Getting back to the fact is that you don't want to say, hang the towel back up because you want to save the planet. The idea is that you want to say, this is the message you want to go after here. We also took a look at, well, what types of homes are typically going in and doing those deeper measures and making the changes. And we found it was, you would think the customers who had a lot of equity in their home, it was almost all paid off, that might be a good candidate. We found that wasn't necessarily the case. The customers who had a lot of equity in their home was almost paid off, and the customers who had very little equity were less inclined to implement deeper measures. It was the customers in the middle spot that were the ones to go after. So what we do is we cater our message to make sure that those are the customers we want to go and hit, and try to make sure we influence them to go forward. But we keep our database to know what customers have upgraded their equipment and which ones haven't, because if the home changes ownership, we now can go back and hit them with a new message.
So can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Which is, what you're doing is really fantastic. So are you doing this out of the goodness of your heart, or how are you getting paid for this work?
Okay.
Because you're in a regulated business, right?
That's correct. We're a regulated utility, and I'd love to say we do it out of the kindness of our heart, but we are paid to do this. But we have an incentive mechanism to achieve savings targets. So there is a reward mechanism in there. But the thing is that we believe as a company that this is the right thing for our customers, because if you can reduce the customers' bills and make it much more affordable, the thing is you're going to keep your businesses open. They'll be more profitable, more competitive. So there's a lot of good things associated with it.
I just want to follow up, because I think that this is another area of government involvement, which is utility regulation. So just give another couple more sentences on the Public Service Commission. How do they regulate? You say there's a target that they
created an incentive system for the utilities to save energy. How does that work?
Okay, good. It's actually, and I'll elaborate a little bit more. Connecticut's been like the tale of two cities. It's been the best of times and the worst of times. And those of you who are familiar with the legislative process, Connecticut started off back when we deregulated back in 1998. They created an incentive mechanism, a customer charge of 3 mils on the customer's electric bill to fund a pool of money that would be used to provide incentives for customers. That was created in 1998. Programs were essentially launched around the year 2000. In 2003, Connecticut experienced a deficit situation, and they found a way to solve that deficit situation. They utilized the energy efficiency money to solve the deficit situation. So those were the dark years. But we've learned from our mistakes, and we've actually come out of that now. And so we have this funding mechanism where we receive funding from each customer who pays their electric bill. It funds this pool of money, and we also have a similar charge on the natural gas customers. In addition to that, we also receive part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative funding, and then the energy savings that we produce within our portfolio of programs, we actually bid that into the New England System Operators capacity market, and we extract money from the capacity market as if the energy savings and demand reduction that we're producing were a generator. So we're actually extracting monetary value. So the better we do, the more we save, the more money that we can bring in to essentially plow back into the programs. And that way we don't have to always keep raising the ante on getting this funded by customers. The other thing that we've done over time is we've also tried to steer customers from being so reliant on utilizing incentives as the only mechanism to take action, because what you do is you essentially create a dependency where the customer will wait for the incentive to be great. So the other thing that's key is to make sure you have a clear, consistent message of this is what the incentives will be, and there's not going to be a fire sale at the end of the year because the activity wasn't as robust as you'd like to see. You know what? You ride out the storm. You don't increase the incentives, because all you do is train people to wait till the end of the year. So you want to make sure you don't do that. And the other thing is you have to send a strong message that the funding is not going to go away, because once that happened in 2003, it was very difficult for us to get customers re-engaged and to believe that there will be something there. Because you have homeowners that are looking at making an investment, and they want to make sure that, you know what, if I'm going to get a $500 rebate or a $1,000 rebate for putting in a new piece of heating equipment in my home, I want to make sure that it's going to be there when I actually install it. Or if I'm a large manufacturer, I'm investing thousands of dollars up front to do a detailed assessment of what makes sense to invest in my plant. Why do I want to go down that path if I know that you're going to pull that away from me later on? So I don't know if I answered the question, but...
So Frank, New York State and California both have taxes on energy use that is distributed by NYSERDA and by the utilities that funds companies like yours to do what?
Well, we go out and we get customers to come in and go ahead and do projects. So we're actually going out and physically talking to customers and getting them to look at projects. Elizabeth mentioned something very important. A lot of customers aren't in one location. So they are looking for firms like ours that are national in scope that can help them navigate through multiple incentive programs. There is some interesting things, you know, when we talk about financing and you start to take a look at that, there isn't a lot of belief in some ways in terms of the investment community, and so we've been working with some lenders to try to get them involved in that process. But the interesting thing is, in research that we're doing in terms of, you know, in the programs that we've been running, we find something very, very interesting, that there's a percentage of customers, and it sits about 30%, that no matter what the payback, even if it's 0 months, they won't do it. Which kind of, you know, I think there's a perception that, are we really telling them the truth, or will I get that? Is it too good to be true? There can be other reasons, but I think that that's a major issue for a lot of customers.
And I think that speaks to the need for consistent and ongoing measurement and verification of the actual savings. I mean, the energy efficiency paradigm is a bit of a, you know, troubling idea. The idea that you're going to spend more to use less. energy, which for most of us, except when it goes down, is a very intangible commodity, right? I mean, let's face it, we like to spend money and have stuff in our hands that we can kick or touch as a result of it. And I think that one of the things that we need to do consistently as an industry is make those savings tangible, make them measurable, make them demonstrable. And I think that if we at least design programs that are performance-based, so that incentives are paid based on the amount of energy savings above and beyond a baseline, increased incentives based on increased energy savings, and we do it over time, meaning we collect that data, we require that performance over a longer period of time. We get two things. We get better performance and we get better data.
I was interested in the conversation about cultural change and behavior change. And one of the things I was thinking about as you guys were talking, you go to a hotel in Latin America or in Europe, and the key that you use to open a door also is used to turn the electricity on in the room. When you leave the room, you take the key with you, the lights go out. But why do hotels in America not adopt those kinds of... It really speaks to this whole issue of institutions and organizations that simply willfully refuse to pay attention, just as individuals refuse to pay attention. You know, in Colombia, we're doing all sorts of things to reduce energy use, timers on lights and, you know, new light fixtures and all the rest of that, because an institution like this gets the idea that you can save money by doing this. But why is there this resistance? Richard?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to answer just that question.
Well, you can answer some
I've been
other
in government long enough to know that if you're asked a question, you just answer the question you want to be asked. I mean, I think I want to just again draw a line on something that several people have talked about, and go back to this point that you started with low-hanging fruit. And I want you to listen to the fact that the traditional policy approach has been to give grants. So here you're talking about something that in theory, I shouldn't say in theory, in reality, it pays for itself. But the way we've been trying to solve it is to throw money at it. And so talk about a kind of policy market failure. There's very little evidence that we get what the economists would call price elasticity demand. In other words, if you're lowering the price of it, it's not like we're getting a lot more demand for it. We're just spending more money. So this is why this idea of trying to find more effective ways of spending the money that we're getting, and to be clear, it's not a tax in most states. The kind of funds that government uses, and it can be administered either by government programs or by utilities, comes from what Ron talked about, ratepayer funds. In other words, there's a charge, you look at your Con Ed bill, there are a whole bunch of charges, and some of those charges go to support state-related energy efficiency programs, and when people talk about RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standards,
mandated by the state on a
tax,
utility bill?
I'm sorry, I forgot that but there's a difference between the economist's answer and the political answer, right? So I'm not going to comment on the fact that other than we do not call it a tax. But the question is, how do we get the biggest bang for the buck out of that money? And I think that this idea of different ways of engaging with customers is right. So we've talked about communities, we've talked about comfort, we've talked about health, we've talked about this idea of being independent. That seems to be another theme that's important. And so you can imagine that those are things that are going to motivate customers that are more important motivators than just saving the planet or just saving money. But then there's another thing that we've talked about that I also think is important just to talk about, which is this idea of utility incentives. Because, so, you know, one part is very customer engagement oriented, and that's one way to solve one part of the market failure. Another part of the market failure relates to the fact that utilities, I'm not talking, I don't know anything about Connecticut, but in New York State, utilities don't provide generation. It's a deregulated market. But the utilities are indifferent about how much energy you use. They don't get paid more if you use more energy, but they're indifferent. And the problem with that model is that the way we actually compensate utilities is based upon how much wires they put in the ground. It dates from the time when utilities first started and we were worried about universal access to electricity. Well, we don't really need to worry about that anymore, but that's how we still compensate utilities. How much capital do they put to work? And so what that's created is a system in New York State, a utility system, and this is, I'm pretty sure, is true across the country. Our system efficiency of Con Ed is between 50 and 55%. So there's this huge amount of capital that is put to work that is hardly ever used, but all has to earn a rate of return. And so to change utility incentives to encourage utilities to put capital in things that will improve system efficiency is something the utilities actually might be quite interested in doing if we just change the rules. And by improving efficiency, the reason why it's built that way is because it's built for the hottest 2 hours of the year.
Excellent. Interesting point. Anybody want to comment on that? Because in a moment I'm going to ask the audience for their questions before we do that.
The only thing I would just want to add is the other thing that the policy, the whole funding for energy efficiency accomplishes is we didn't talk about was market transformation. And that's another area that I think the programs that are offered are very good about, is because it tries to, you don't want to create that dependency that I mentioned earlier for a long period of time. You want to get customers up and then move on. And we've seen that to a certain degree in the lighting market. Everyone's familiar with the compact fluorescent lamps now, and the pricing on that drop. We're actually phasing out what we fund for energy efficiency lamps to make that more affordable, and we're now moving on to LED lighting, and we're starting to see that, and that market is really changing really rapidly. And a lot of that is in response to the fact is that there are incentives to get customers and manufacturers geared up and ready to supply that. And the idea is that not to do that for the long haul, is to get that down to now where that product now becomes affordable for customers and essentially move on to the next best thing. And what we've done is also we've tried to train customers by changing how our incentives operate. Whereas in the past you would get a flat incentive whether you changed out lighting or you changed out your heating or cooling system. What we do now is that heating and cooling systems, the economics around trying to get a customer to change it out are significantly different than looking at lighting. So what we do is we offer a lower incentive if you were looking at lighting, and we offer a little bit more or an increased incentive if you did lighting in another measure. And then what we do is we actually provide enhanced financing if you go in and do those multiple measures. And the idea is that when you have an engaged customer, what you want to be able to do is motivate them to look beyond the single measure that they might have been focused on, and to say, take a look at your building or your home as a system and figure out what is the best way for me to approach that, and try to do that as a system and do more than that one thing.
Okay. I want to open this up to questions from the audience. There's we have microphone people? Okay, over here there's a question. And let me ask you to limit these to questions. We're going to have some time afterwards for some informal conversation. So questions for the panel?
Yeah, one thing I'm continuously surprised when I look at energy policy and energy efficiency policy, because it seems almost exclusively focused on electricity and transportation fuels. But about 30% or more of the energy we use in the country is thermal energy, and much of it being used in homes. But we seem to just sort of, defer to the idea that the homes are going to be heated with fossil fuels, and what the heck, let's get a little bit more efficient. We have technologies available like ground source or geothermal heat pumps that run at 300 to 500% efficiencies. And with government policy support, we could probably create for them the same kind of third-party...
Is there a question?
Yes, it is a question.
Let's hear the question.
We could create the same kind of third-party market, third-party ownership market as we have for solar, and cause that market to explode. Why are we focusing only on electricity and transportation fuels? Why aren't we doing what we can to encourage exceptionally efficient technologies like ground source heat pumps?
Okay, thank you. Any comments on the geothermal question?
Well, I think it depends on the area of the country you're talking about. If you take a look at a place like Florida, where they have, first off, fairly sandy soil, and so a fairly easy time, particularly if you take a look at something like along the Gulf Coast. They'll actually do loops right into the water. And so geothermal is extremely cheap, and they do focus tremendously on that. In the Northeast, and you know, Ron, you'd probably have a better sense in terms of Connecticut, but it's a little bit harder to just say you'll do geothermal, particularly in communities that are fairly developed, where you'd have to do trenching and those sorts of activities.
Just to add to that, in Connecticut, to give you a picture, about 60% of our customers heat with fuel oil. And about a little bit less than 40% heat with natural gas, and about 10% heat with electricity. So that gives you a sense of how customers heat today. And what are the programs and services that we provide not only the incentives but the financing to help customers try to improve upon that. Geothermal is an option to look at. It's a very expensive option to look at. You know, in Connecticut, we're built on a rock basically, so you're talking about drilling, and it's not a cheap solution, but it is cost effective in some installations. But there are other things to take a look at. I mean, for instance, if you have natural gas available, going to high efficiency natural gas might be the best, most economical solution for you to go to. If you don't, and you have fuel oil today, perhaps looking at a ductless heat pump or a cold climate heat pump might be the way to go about doing that versus doing that. So there are multiple options. Geothermal is certainly an option. It does well in Connecticut, but it's very expensive for customers to partake in.
Some other questions in the back there? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my question is for the utilities. We've talked a lot about financial incentives, and I'm wondering about changes to the rate structure. Instead of a flat increasing rate structure, what about something like decoupling? I understand that experiment has kind of recently failed in Minnesota, but is that an option? Can we look at other rate structures?
Has something failed in NYSERDA, Richard?
Did you say
Minnesota.
Oh, in Minnesota. I heard the same thing. Yeah. Anyway, what about rate structure?
I can start, but Elizabeth may want to have some comments on this as well. With regards to decoupling, right now in Connecticut, the utilities aren't fully decoupled. The natural gas utilities and one of the electric utilities does have a mechanism that essentially decouples them. I unfortunately work for the company that isn't decoupled, so I feel that pain right now. And what that does do is that definitely hurts us on our revenue model side, and that was the point that Richard was making earlier. Be that as it may, decoupling is one of the barriers that needs to be overcome for utilities to truly embrace energy efficiency vigorously. I mean, Northeast Utilities' position is that we do embrace that because we believe it's the right thing for our customers and it's right for the economy. But we're also advocating for the changes to decouple that because we are financially hurt by that. But having said all that, you do need to get that barrier removed in order to, I think, to help make that become less of a barrier, because as more and more energy efficiency increases, it becomes more and more of a burden on the company if they're not decoupled.
And I would say we've experienced something very similar in New Jersey, where our natural gas companies are decoupled. The natural gas companies in New Jersey tend to be smaller and can reach out in a much more, perform outreach in a much more custom way than some of our larger electric and gas companies like PSE&G and JCP&L, which is First Energy. But it is something absolutely that we need to take a look at, because as Richard was saying earlier, our current rate structure is based on the idea that we're going to socialize the cost of expanding our infrastructure to the more rural areas of the country. That's not a problem anymore. It's that our infrastructure today is just completely overburdened, and we need to figure out ways to reduce the strain on the system, because that congestion adds to the cost of the delivery of our energy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that New York, by the way, has a decoupled market. And so the point that I was trying to make before is, great thing about decoupling is there's no disincentive for utilities aren't getting paid more for the amount of electrons, but there's no incentive. And so that's why this idea, as Elizabeth is talking about, is the idea of we have congestion. We have lots of capital that needs to go into the system. And if we can create economic incentives for utilities to go beyond decoupling, to have utilities get paid for investments that could go in that would improve system efficiency, that would be cheaper, that would be a win for the utilities, a win for ratepayers, and a win for energy efficiency. The broad question about rate design is an important one. It's not just about decoupling, it's also about time of use pricing. We act as though it's the cost the same to produce electricity at any time of the day. That's simply not true, but you know, in New York State, we don't expose residential customers to time of use pricing. I'm not advocating it, but it's hard to get markets to work right if you don't have the price signals. Is that right, Professor? Okay, I just want to be sure. I want to tax. I was wrong on the taxes, but I want to be sure that I'm better on this. But the other thing that's come up is this: we see it in net metering. The challenges to net metering, which goes exactly to what Elizabeth says, is that you know the dirty little secret that we don't want to talk about with solar is in some places it costs the system. It benefits the system when we have solar. It benefits the grid. In other places, it costs the grid. But we don't want to say, we have advocates that say, well, net metering is terrible and we should do away with it. Those are, you know, sort of the anti-solar people. And then we have the solar people that say, well, no, we have to absolutely continue with net metering because it helps the system. But in fact, neither are true. Neither extreme positions are true. But that would mean challenging what Elizabeth just talked about. It would mean, well, it means in some places we should have some incentives that benefit those places where solar helps, and in other places we should have less incentive. That really goes really fundamental, a really fundamental challenge to the way we price electricity.
Yeah, just a couple of points. I ran some projects that were out in ComEd where we were doing actual time of use rates for customers. And one of the interesting things that we saw is we had customers who were signing on to be part of the program. And so as we started to do market analysis to really say, you know, what kind of a person would do this, we started to find that actually the segment of the population in Chicago that was very interested in this were gamblers. And so there is a little bit that we have to become smarter about customers, and there is a lot about the fact that that we live in regulatory environments. You know, there's an awful lot of discussion all the time about the fact that you know, you see it with Germany as they've gone and pushed towards a lot of energy efficiency. That, oh, you know, we're going to a totally, you know, utilities will die or whatever. And from I think our perspective is that there's really a place for utilities in large degree because there's a fundamental difference between phone service and electrical. In phone service, if you don't plug it in correctly, your phone doesn't work. With electric, if you set up a generator incorrectly, you could die. And so you do need people who actually understand the systems and can actually, you know, deliver the power when you need it. And it's an extremely important difference.
Well, and I think that there's an opportunity in engaging the utilities to take advantage of the existing relationship between the customer and the utility. That's an ongoing relationship. Utilities understand their customer base and energy usage patterns in a way that certainly, you know, the PUCs, the Public Utility Commissions, cannot. So I think there's an opportunity to and a need to keep the utilities engaged in energy efficiency, to leverage that relationship with customers, to innovate, to provide innovative technologies and financing mechanisms based on their customer classes. I think that they have unique insight into that sort of a statewide programs don't necessarily have the opportunity to take advantage of.
Okay, I'm going to take one more question over here. And then I'm going to ask our panelists to give us some concluding thoughts before we go in the back and hopefully hang out a while and talk energy with all of you. Well, since I don't understand the question, if anybody here does, go ahead.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, I do understand the question. So I think that, and it's come up, Ron just brought it up a little bit, in the sense that when we look at Germany, the utilities have lost half their market value. And so there's, because there's been an explosion of, thanks to government policy, a lot of renewable energy. And so utilities face generally a challenge in the United States that the cost of solar and other batteries, even using natural gas for combined heat and power, all these distributed solutions are going down in cost, and the cost of traditionally produced central station power goes up. And so you don't know when those lines are crossing, but that's a challenge to the traditional utility business model. And so that's why when people talk about utility 2.0 or utility of the future, it's because what are we going to do? Because you can see the dynamic that what happens in a socialized systems where we socialize costs as customers begin to unplug or reduce their reliance on the grid, but they literally don't unplug. They still want to solar, you know, you still need to be part of the grid. But if they're beginning to reduce their dependence on the grid and revenues go down, cost for everybody goes up, and then it means it encourages other people to keep reducing their reliance on the grid. And that's the kind of going around the death spiral that some people that are very worried about the industry advocate. So that's the background for Utility 2.0.
Thank you.
And there are probably 45 or 50 different confabs going around the country now talking about Utility 2.0. So the other thing I'm going to say about this is that there are a lot of utilities thinking about it, a lot of regulators thinking about it, and ideally you'd like regulators and utilities to think about it at the same time. And we are doing that in New York. And so we, I think the outlines of that, I'm not going to give you an answer, but the kinds of questions are, think about a wires business that's a regulated business and a platform business which is not regulated, which earns fees. And so what's in the platform business that, there's data and the ability to monetize the data, subject to privacy-related issues. There's a billing system for right now that could be available to third parties where utilities aren't really getting paid appropriately for those kind of services. And the last point I'm going to say just about competitive markets is that I think we really need to think about that part of the system which needs to be regulated and that part which can be competitive. And increasingly things around customers could be unregulated. And so we already know that solar, you can hire somebody to put solar in a sense that, that's not a regulated business now. The connection is a regulated business, but when you think about the meter, well, is it possible that a third party could put in the meter and give you various ancillary services, but it'd still have to provide the data to the wires company? So there are lots and lots of questions about all this, but I think more and more you're going to see, you talked about the feds, and David and I did have the pleasure to work at the federal government, but I think the policy innovation at this point around utility stuff is happening around the states.
Okay, let me ask all the panelists, and then I'll get a last word into just your last word on energy efficiency and, as I think you just said, the future of the utilities and the regulatory system that we've set up for energy. Do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience before, as I said, afterwards we have refreshments and we're hoping everybody comes in the back and talks informally. So Elizabeth.
I guess the thing that I would like you all to take away from today is that energy efficiency really is an industry in its infancy, and that to date it has been largely incentivized through a societal benefits charge. That's the charge that gets added to your utility bills to pay for programs like energy efficiency and the development of renewable energy. Because it's in its infancy, we have a lot of work left to be done, and we could all certainly benefit from having a crystal ball to kind of understand where it's headed. At the same time, I would encourage any of you who are interested to get involved, because it's a very exciting time to be involved in energy efficiency.
Thank you. Ron?
Yeah, I think, energy efficiency is something that, is important, and it's going to always continue to change, because there's always going to be that next technological breakthrough that's going to mean we need to look at doing something different. And so I think keeping an eye and being innovative is going to be what's key to be successful in the energy efficiency space. I think from a company perspective, I think Northeast Utilities has been very progressive and is very innovative in that area. And we would welcome competition in that area, because we think we do better than anyone there, especially when you're looking at trying to go after getting energy efficiency accomplished, not just going in and saying, well, can I get the cheapest kilowatt hour reduced? Because if that was the objective, then I would go and screw light bulbs in all day long. But the thing is that all you do is a disservice by doing that. So if the mission truly is to actually have a meaningful reduction, you have to look at it comprehensively. You have to look at it from a whole building or a whole business perspective. The other thing is that you have to serve all customers, at least from a regulatory standpoint. If all customers are paying into this energy efficiency fund, you want to make sure that they all can extract value out of it. So you want to offer it to all, but you also want to be smart about it. And one of the things that we also look at is that we look at our distribution system. If our distribution system load is growing on it, we know that because we can see that growing over time. And energy efficiency is not something you can implement overnight and have an impact. It takes time to develop and actually install the projects. But if you're looking at it in advance, you can deploy your marketing efforts on those areas that are starting to look like they're going to be overloaded in 3 to 5 years. So that way you can head it off at the pass. If load is growing significantly, you may not defer the need to do some upgrades, or I should say, you may not be able to avoid the need for those upgrades, but you will be able to defer it to the future. That saves money, that saves expense, it saves costs to the customers. It's what's good all the way around.
Yeah, I think that it is a very exciting time to be in this industry. Worked with the founder of a company a few years ago who always used to say that if Thomas Edison walked around the grid, he would recognize every part of it. That's not going to be true, and it's quickly not becoming true as we start to see more microturbines, and the list goes on of other things. And so there's a lot of services that have to be created. There's a lot of regulatory models that have to change, and there's a lot of new business models that have to change. And there's an aging workforce in the utility sector, so it is a great time to be in energy. We talk about it often as this is almost the internet boom. It's just the beginning of when the Netscape just came aboard. It's very interesting and very exciting.
I'd like to pick up on where Frank left off, because I think that Edison might recognize the electric generation and distribution business, but he wouldn't recognize all the stuff that we use electricity for, because Edison thought it was just going to be about lighting. And that's the opportunity we have now today with our energy system, that it can do a lot more for us than we realize, and it can provide a lot more value. And it, we can think about resiliency. That's a kind of value. But it's, you could have somebody get in touch with you and say, look, we can see you've got an old air conditioning system, and if you replace it, your kids aren't going to get asthma, and you can pay for it through the savings. That's a real value-added service and a business model that doesn't yet exist. I'm just making that up. Or to the point about the gamblers, you could have an app on your phone, and if there was some kind of ability to sell into the grid to not just set up because you can do now, turn your thermostat on and off from your phone, but your ability to, for some number of customers, to decide at the exact high moment that they can turn off something and get paid for it, you know, that might be cool for some number of people. So we've talked about energy efficiency as it's its own thing, but we've talked about embedding it in broader issues of social engagement. And I just want to embed it again in this idea that we have a whole new energy system that's coming, and we have to imagine it.
Thank you. I think my concluding thought, I have three concluding thoughts. One is that energy is the central sustainability issue. Pretty much every piece of economic development we saw in the 20th century and in the 21st century has been based on some invention that required energy, whether it was air conditioning or refrigeration or television or automobiles, everything. Energy is at the center of our lifestyle. When people didn't have access to energy for a few weeks after Hurricane Sandy, they went through withdrawal. And you could actually see it physically throughout this region. So that would be the first point, the centrality of energy, the importance of it, and I agree, this is in many respects a reinvented industry. The second point of that is the one, I'll repeat what you said, which is that energy efficiency has to be seen embedded in this system of energy development. And what we don't really know is what will the technology look like going forward. I wouldn't have predicted 20 years ago there'd be 5 billion cell phones on the planet. We don't really know what kind of energy technology we're going to see in 10 or 20 or 30 years. So that would be the second point. And the third point is I want to thank this terrific panel for a really great discussion. And I want to invite everybody to have some wine and cheese and beer in the back. And let's talk some more about energy for a while. Thank you all for coming.